Welcome to the next chapter in information technology. Today it's about data security, and after last week we discuss now defense. Let's do a first repetition. We have defined the four most important goals of data security, which are availability, integrity, confidentiality, and accountability. The three most important are the three foremost mentioned in this list, and often they are abbreviated with CIA: confidentiality, integrity, availability. Then, the threat situation has become more and more difficult. We do have more frequent and we do have more sophisticated attacks compared to, let's say, 10 years before. Moreover, our IT infrastructure is becoming more complex and difficult to protect. Simply think about the more and more devices which are connected to the internet and which are no longer pure computers but smartphones and embedded systems. And many of those are not really that good protected as a laptop or a computer is. And finally, the potential damage of threats has increased. Think about, for example, a car which has embedded hardware and software and which might be taken over by some attackers. Then not only the computer is in danger, but the car and all the people sitting in the car. Finally, we have seen that data security problems do have different root causes. The first root cause is the information technology itself. Due to various reasons, we simply know and we have to accept that we will always have insecure systems. Or take it the other way around, we will never achieve a 100% secure system. Maybe we can reduce the risk that some kind of fraud happens. However, there will be a remaining insecurity. Organizations. Data security is often not that well organized in companies. For example, you have lots of countermeasures, but these do not fit together. Sometimes it's more like a patchwork. Solutions have to be more systematic, and this is something which is not to be done by computer scientists. It's has to be done by management. That's you in the future. Finally, there's humans. And you know how you are, we know how we are. We are all comfortable, we are naive and ignorant. We do not use these discipline we should use. We use too weak passwords, we keep ports open, and so on and so on. And again, if you have a look on a company level and you have employees in this company, it is up to management to again and again remind people and motivate people to take care. So what are the learning objectives for today? First, we will have a look on typical countermeasures against attacks. We will especially have a look on passwords. So how do they work? What are good passwords and what are maybe weak passwords? And finally, we will have a look on a more systematic approach on a company level. There is two things. One we will briefly touch, which is namely the ISO 27000, which is a standard for companies to organize their protection. And we have a German implementation which is called BSI Grundschutz, basic protection, so to say. And don't be afraid, we will have an English copy of this BSI Grundschutz in here as well. Let's have a look at some means. First, IT security always starts with management. IT security is not only from a legal perspective a task for the management of a company. And this includes first to do a risk analysis. That means simply have a look on what are the values in your company which are under risk if there is some kind of incident happening with respect to data security. Based on this, management has to adopt guidelines, has to look for guidelines, what should be done. In the long run, if you think about this human factor as a root cause, sensitization of employees is an ongoing activity which has to be done by management. On top, IT security management, that means a systematic approach to IT security has to be established. And once this is done, operational measures like using a virus software, taking regular backups and so on have to be identified and implemented. However, it all starts with management. Unless there is no systematic approach driven by management, the rest will always be some nitty-gritty details, but not a systematic approach. Let's have a look on some operational measures which are quite well known. First, there would be access controls. Not all software, not all hardware should be available to all people, to all employees in a company. This is the same as you do with rooms. Usually, not all rooms are open for everybody. There is, let's say, some private things which are locked away, and so it should be with hardware and software. Of course, this first requires a user concept. So you have to define roles for the employee, and you have to define which role needs access to what kind of data, what kind of software, what kind of hardware. On top, you have then to establish access control. Most often used, for example, using passwords, but for example, ID cards or keys or tokens can be used as well. Access control should be restricted, so that's a second idea. Restricted user rights. You should think about what is needed, and you should restrict hardware, software data to only those things which are really required. And this starts from an operation system perspective, goes to application software and includes the data. Restrictive configuration once again goes into the right direction. Restrictive means, in doubt, give fewer rights, restrict rights. And if the rights are not managed in a sensible way, this often has a disadvantage that an employee is unproductive for longer when she is changing roles in a company. So we worked on thesis where we simply tried to measure how long does it take if an employee moves from one department to another department, and in average it takes 2 to 3 weeks in bigger German companies until the employees become productive again, until they have all the rights. If, however, it takes that long, that's probably an indication that in principle something is not going wrong here. There should be a clear documentation which role requires what kind of rights. And yes, that's actually a challenge for today's companies to come up with an approach like this. Next one is about keeping software up to date. You might remember this WannaCry virus, or you have heard about that 99% of attacks make use of known exploits where most of them are already closed by a patch. However, this correction is not installed. As a private user, most often your software is regularly updated in the background. This includes, for example, your Windows or your iOS operating system. In companies, the situation is often more complex, as the individual software versions depend on each other. And sometimes it's not clear whether a new version of a piece of software will not cause new problems. But in the end, it is always important to have a good understanding on which software version is in use, what kind of danger is, or what kind of risk do you have when not updating to newer versions, and in principle the latest versions should be used, and simply due to the fact that otherwise you risk problems. Moreover, outdated software should be deleted. You've seen this problem with the WannaCry virus, where lots of companies still use outdated, which means software which is not supported anymore. So if an exploit is detected, you cannot get a patch anymore because, again, it is outdated and is no longer under maintenance. When did you do your last private backup of your laptop? Backup copies should be made regularly, and the copies should be checked regularly. Again, we have seen incidents where backups are taken on a daily basis, but once the backup was required, you see that the backup is not really working. The backup is only half, or it's done on a broken tape, something like that. So it's not sufficient to do these backups, but you have to regularly check if it works fine. Backup copies should be stored in a way that an attack does not destroy all copies. And finally, you have to be aware that backup could collide with other goals, for example with data privacy goals. Antivirus software. Viruses and worms can be caught through emails, by surfing the web, by file attachment and the like. On each computer there should be an antivirus program, and all data that gets onto the computer from external sources should be checked. However, sometimes the virus scanner is not up to date. So if a new virus pops up tomorrow and the virus checker is informed about this new virus maybe next week, then the virus will have, let's say, a week time to infect your computer. So instead of just checking, you should every now and then, means regularly, run a virus scan on your computer to see if it is already infected. Similarly, run firewalls. There is a distinction made between personal firewalls, which is usually just a piece of software, and a hardware firewall, which is a certain computer which is at the entry of this company intranet. What do these firewalls do? Basically, they control network access. For example, there could be blacklisted IP addresses or blacklisted domain addresses, and vice versa, there could be whitelists. Blacklist means you are forbidden to go there, or whitelist means if you go to another IP address rather than the one on the whitelist, you will not have access due to these settings in the firewall. There are many ports on your computer. Ports are for different software programs, for example email, World Wide Web, FTP and so on. And if a port is not used, it should be closed, simply like you close a door to not let somebody in. Use sandboxes. A sandbox only gives potential dangerous programs a playground to run in. For example, your browser can be run in a sandbox. Programs that are part of web pages can then only be executed in the sandbox, and they do not get access and cannot manipulate data outside of this sandbox. And talking about web access, disable active content if possible. so for example restrict the usage of JavaScript or ActiveX, they should, if possible, be deactivated. You should encrypt sensitive data, and we will have a whole chapter about encryption and decryption. What is possible to be encrypted? Passwords, files, complete hard disks, and data during transmission. Again, we will talk about encryption later on in the next chapter. We just talked about this user concept and to restrict the rights for employees. Having a user concept, this requires authentication, which means somebody is identified. In the real world, you usually do this, for example, by showing a passport. In the virtual world, in the computers, the most often used method is by a combination of name and password. The password is a secret which is shared between the user and the IT system. After the user has been authenticated by proving he knows a password, he is authorized. So authentication and authorization always go hand in hand. And what is he authorized to? For example, to use the data and the software and the services and the hardware which is assigned to him. Let's take a brief example to the system QIS, which you know. Take Peter Miller, who is a student, and he logs into QIS using his account name and his password. As he knows the password, he is authenticated. So the system believes that here the real Peter Miller is on the keyboard. Peter Miller is now authorized to register for an exam. That's what his rights are all about. He is not authorized to see the exam results of his fellow students, because that's not part of his rights. His rights are restricted to their own owners of these data. You should understand that authentication with a password only is a weak protection. Authentication by means of a password is not safe. It is based on the knowledge of a password. However, passwords can be guessed or could be intercepted. A higher level of security is reached by not knowledge but property or a physical characteristic. A property could, for example, be an EC card, a USB key, or something like a dongle. A physical characteristic of a first person could be his fingerprint, his face ID, an iris, a voice, something like that. Of course, we can combine these typical measures. We talk about strong authentication if several measures are taken at the same time. And we talk about two-factor authentication if two measures are taken. It's important to understand that you cannot use two passwords, because then it would be still just knowledge. It should be, for example, knowledge and a property, or property of and physical characteristic, etc. An example could be to have a smart card, an EC card, plus a PIN, a personal identification number. The smart card is a physical object, which means you have a property. The PIN is a secret, so if you know the PIN and if you have the smart card, then you're authenticated, and this would be a typical two-factor authentication. How does a process of login with a password look like? Simply to understand how an attacker could try to get hold of the password. Think about the first registration, for example, at Amazon. During the registration, you enter your password. And to avoid typos, the password usually has to be entered 2 times. The password then has to be stored at the server of the new service. In this case, it has to be stored on Amazon server. Now, if you later want to log into this service, the following happens. You enter at your browser your username and password. These values are forwarded to the server, and now the server checks if the two values correspond with the stored values. If not, you're not authenticated. In case both values fit, you're authenticated for a given identity. Now, which possibilities does an attacker have? So first thing is, a password could be guessed, especially if it is weak and can easily be cracked. Then, the transfer of the message is not secured and can be intercepted. So you should always take care that the protocol is not HTTP, but HTTPS, where S stands for secure, which means there is some kind of encryption ongoing. What could the attacker do as well? So he could attack the server and try to grab all passwords and additional data. This happens again and again. And as many people use the same password at several servers, the attacker can now try to use these passwords, for example, not only at Amazon, but at eBay, PayPal, and he would have a quite good chance of success because simply people use passwords several times. So what can be done against this? First thing is, server should store only encrypted passwords. Ideally, the server should encrypt the password before storing. For this purpose, so-called hash algorithms are in use. So what is a hash algorithm? It means it's a trapdoor function which can be used only in one way. So it's possible to encrypt, but it's never possible to decrypt a password. So if, let's say, an attacker steals a list of encrypted passwords, he just knows the encrypted ones, but it's not able to decrypt based on what it's in there. These functions which just go in one way are called a trapdoor function. They are sometimes based on mathematical principles where you have an easy direction where in one direction is easy, but the other direction is very hard. MD5 and SHA-1 are popular examples. Both are nowadays not 100% secure anymore. Better, you should use SHA-2, SHA-3, SHA-5, for example. By the way, hash algorithms are used for different kind of other problems as well, not only for encryption. So what happens if you log in with your clear password then? If the server has stored only your encrypted password, you cannot compare the encrypted with your unencrypted password. So what happens? So the server takes your readable password and encrypts it and compares it with the encrypted password. This is easily possible. And if both the encrypted delivered password and the encrypted store password are the same, then everything is fine. One of the problems with passwords is weak passwords. Many people use weak passwords. So what are weak passwords? First, there is a password of little complexity. A password which is very short, for example. Then there is a password which can be derived from user's context. This is called social hacking. So if you take simply your nickname or take your name and add a number to it, then this is really easy to guess. And last but not least, reused passwords. If, for example, one of these passwords is hacked, then all the other identities are under risk as well. And Why do we use weak passwords? Think about yourself. We are naive, we are comfort, we are ignorant with respect to IT security, and of course, complex passwords, and especially many complex passwords, are hard to remember. Again, what is a password with low complexity? When is a password too simple? So, for example, when you have less than 8 characters and you use only letters or only digits. So either you should have more than 8 characters, better you have more than 12 characters, and you should use letters, a combination of letters, digits and special signs. Or you do have a very long password, for example 20 letters. Or a password which could be found in a dictionary. In the table on the right side, you see a table which shows passwords of leaked databases. These kind of databases are available in the internet. They contain more than 100 million entries of possible passwords. And professional hackers use these kind of databases to see where can we hack and how can we guess passwords. And if other people, like the one from the Hasso-Plattner Institute in here, get access to these databases, you can still find out what is the current level of security with respect to passwords. In here you can see easy guessable passwords like 123456 has been used in 1.19% of all cases. And 12345678 has been used by 0.52%. And you can see, even if the password has a length of 9, it's quite easy to guess and easy to find out. In total, if you sum up the frequency here, it's more than 2%. That means if I have a class of 50 students, the probability that I will at least find one of your passwords is relatively high. Passwords which are based on user contacts are easily guessable. So many people use personal details as passwords. Name of partner, name of a child, name of a parent, name of a pet, your date of birth, the car number, the telephone number, and so on and so on. Or passwords can be derived from used services like Amazon 123, Photoshop 100, and so on. And attackers who know their victims can easily guess these kind of passwords. This is called social hacking. Reused passwords are a risk. Nowadays, many people use strong passwords, but the same password is used for several accounts. Example, take the password 56CZER &9 equal A3, whatever this means. So it is long enough, it is complex enough, should be secure. However, if this password is leaked in a service like Amazon and it is reused, other services are in danger. Take the following example, and this is not a singular event, it happens again and again. Yeah, for example, Sony has been hacked and millions of customers' data has been stolen, and especially the PlayStation data, which is again a user ID and password. So if these passwords have been reused, good luck. So how to choose a safe password? Based on the arguments above, you can derive a secure password should consist of at least, and you see I have now wiped out 8 and 10 because you need stronger and stronger passwords because attackers become more and more powerful. So you should have at least 12 characters, better more. And they should consist of numbers, letters and special characters. And if, however, you have a password which is, for example, 20 letters, 20 characters, then it's fine to have just letters. And they should not be part of any dictionary. Should be hard against social hacking, so the password should not be based on any information related to your person. And the password should not be reused. Important, in contrast to older recommendations where password should be cryptic and password should be changed regularly, today recommendations focus on length. Length is better than complex. So better have an easy to remember password, which for example is 20 characters long, which is easy to use, easy to remember, and reuse of passwords for different digital letters is a no-go. However, the regularly change of passwords is not recommended anymore because people then tend to use easy passwords. So now again, take the perspective of an attacker. What can you do to get hold of others' passwords or to access in somebody's user account? First, you can simply open a web page. You probably know that the username of somebody else, often it is an email address, and then you can start guessing. Again, that's called social hacking. If you got hold of a password database, you can systematically try out those passwords. You could try to intercept or sniff passwords. That's not really a problem. So for you as a user, it means never ever use the password and send it over HTTP. Simply encrypt it using or check that a protocol like HTTPS is used. And this won't help if an attacker installs a keylogger or some other virus on your computer. So what does a keylogger do? A keylogger records each keystroke on your keyboard. And by simply having a look on what is written there, the attacker can find out where a password is located. Again, you could try to simply guess a password. How would you approach this one? Maybe you have leaked passwords from other services. Remember, for example, this Sony case. Or you could start guessing passwords based on a username, something like Michael92 or Dennis17. And statistics show that 10% of users take their first name as a password. And other studies show that passwords could be cracked in 20 to 40% in an easy way. And now you should not think that a password cracker is trying to manually type in all these usernames and passwords. Instead, special programs are used which, for example, on a website could try out, let's say, more than 1,000 passwords per minute. Situation becomes even worse if the following situation happens. An attacker has captured a list of names and hashed passwords. So, for example, think about the situation: Amazon gets hacked and Amazon loses all the combinations of customers and their hashed passwords. Now, how can the attacker gain the clear passwords? There is no backward function. That means once you have the hashed password, there is no easy way to get a clear password again. However, the attacker can hash potential clear passwords and check if these results correspond to the captured ones. Are these identical? He got it. So how is this usually done? First, there is something like a dictionary attack. At the beginning, words from special dictionaries are used. That's why you should not use passwords which are contained in dictionaries. A dictionary could, for example, be the one which is installed in Microsoft Word. So, there is a correction, there's a spell checker. And of course, this spell checker simply is based on something like a dictionary which includes all the right spelling. And these kind of dictionaries are taken, and there's other dictionaries which include all the leaked passwords, and so on and so on. So you should not use these kind of dictionaries passwords. If this is not successful, the attacker can still start with a brute force attack. That means he or she uses all possible combinations of characters. And of course, an attacker would start with the easy combinations. That means the short ones. And now the question is, how long will your password resist? And this is simply a question of mathematics, as you can see on the following page. So again, how efficient is such a brute force attack? 40 years ago, 3 passwords could be checked on, for example, a DEC PDP-11. Today, per second, more than 100 million SHA-1 passwords can be tested on a usual PC. And if you have some special means like rainbow tables, you can go up to several billion passwords per second. And if you have special hardware, and I'm not talking about some supercomputer here, I'm talking about some usual computer you can buy at Aldi, and you plug in some additional graphic cards which contain GPUs, and in combination with these rainbow tables, you can then crack 100 billion passwords. You can test 100 billion passwords per second. So based on these numbers, how long will your password resist? That depends on, first, how long the password is, and second, how big the alphabet, that means the set of characters the password is based on, is all about. So what is the alphabet? If you only take a small alphabet of, let's say, of small letters, then you have an alphabet size of 26. If you have a combination of small and big letters, then it's 52, letters and digits, 62, and so on, 95 if you include special characters. And the longer the password and the bigger the search space is for the attacker. So the formula here is size of alphabet by the power of length of password. So let's have a look on some special situations. Let's take the password secret, all written with small letters. Size of alphabet is 26, the length of the word is 6. So there is 26 by the power of 6 combinations you have to try out. And if you have these 100 billion tests per second, you will be through by really less than 1 second. If you go for secret 12, so you have a size of alphabet which is 26 plus 10. You have a length of 8. Combinations is 36 by the power of 8. Then you will take roughly half a minute. And you can go through the other examples, and you see at the very end, if you have a really complex alphabet and a length of 12, it will take roughly 20 years until you're hacked. And if you have a more thorough look on these combinations, then you will see that the length of the password is more important than the size of the alphabet. Which means maybe you should think of an easy to remember password, but a real long one, and then you're safe as well. So length beats complexity. So again, passwords should consist of at least 12 characters, no user context, and no reuse of passwords should be done. There is use hints like, for example, use slogans to construct complex passwords, as you can see here with Aldi closes at 8, Lidl opens at 7, something like that. However, an alternative is supported on the next slide in this comic. The idea here is that you see there is a complex password at the very beginning, which has an entropy of 28 bits. That's basically the level of secureness. Difficult to guess. It's quite easy because the length is not that big. However, it is still difficult to remember because it's a combination of big and small letters of numbers and of special characters. Now let's take a different approach. Take simply 4 random words which do not belong to each other. For example, take correct horse battery staple. And you see directly this password is longer, however, the alphabet is a little bit smaller still, because length beats complexity. The level of entropy is definitely higher than compared to the first password. So the difficulty to guess is quite hard. However, it should be more easy to remember because basically you have just used 4 random words. Still, we face a problem if you have several digital identities. Simply think about how many do you have. So probably 20, maybe 50. So we have something, for example, FH Aachen, email, Amazon, Zalando, and so on and so on. And even if you now have not so complex passwords which are easy to remember, then still it's hard to have 50 different passwords. So here some kind of special software might help. So-called software safe or bunch of keys, something like that. In the end, it's always the same. It's a single program that administers all combinations of service, user, name and password. And it is itself secured by a very strong password. Examples are, for example, KeyPass or LastPass, something like that. You can see one keyword safe. It's the LastPass. So you can see here that you can easily create new passwords like the one you can see on the web page. And once it's installed and you, for example, go to Amazon, then there is a plug-in into your browser, and then if you're at Amazon, the plug-in sees, okay, Amazon is something where I have a user ID and a password, and it's automatically filled in, and then you don't have to remember, you just have to remember the master password of your key safe. I really recommend to use software like this. This really increases the level of your security. Already in the last chapter we mentioned that you require a systematic way to data security. If not, you will just have a bunch of measures which maybe do not interact in the proper way. So these kind of organizational challenges were identified as root causes for problems in data security. These things include unclear responsibility, lacking sensitivity for data security, especially in senior management, and a lacking systematic approach. Questions: how can I get a systematic approach? Are there recommendations and guidelines? And yes, there are. There is this ISO IEC 27000 series. And if you see here more deeply, you see the standard 27000 is information security and management systems, overview and vocabulary. The next one is about requirements. The next one is about information security management, and so on and so on. So here you can get some information, however, is always on a very abstract level. So it should be independent of the used technology. That's how standards are used usually. And the standards then only talks about operating system or application systems. However, in a specific company, this has to be done more concrete. It has to be concretized. For example, by talking about Windows 11 and SAP, if these are the operating system and the used application system. There is a German implementation of the ISO 27000 series. This is developed by the BSI, the Bundesamt für Sicherheit in der Informationstechnik. The English translation for BSI would be Federal Office for Information Security. So now what is it? The BSI is a federal office located in Bonn, which was founded roughly 30 years ago in 1991. And beyond others, it has the following tasks. It should, for example, protect the networks of the government. So if the parliament is attacked, then maybe the BSI hasn't done a proper job. The BSI should test and certify IT products, of course with respect to data security. It is regularly handing out warnings with respect to malware and exploits. It is responsible to increase awareness in the society with respect to data security. And it's developing uniform security standards. About 4 times per year, the BSI publishes a security situation report about Germany. However, the translation into English is not done that often. So the last publication about IT security situation in Germany I have found is from 2021. In principle, though, the information of the BSI is available in English as well. You could download and follow the link and simply compare the description with the current attacks we experience at the FH Aachen. Finally, let's have a look on the BSI Grundschutz, which is something like basic protection. The BSI Grundschutz systematizes the threats and defines modules which are called Bausteine in German, for the management of IT security. There are so-called process modules, for example, security management, organization and personnel, and so on. And there are system modules which focus on applications, systems, networks, and so on. I really recommend to go to the BSI Grundschutz Compendium. This link is going to the English version. This version contains nearly 800 pages. So the idea is not to really read all these pages, but to have a look on the overall structure. And maybe to deep down a little bit into certain modules, like for example the threat of denial of services, or the module about infrastructure point 8, working from home office. The BSI Grundschutz is a layered model. So what you can see is on top the ISMS, which means the overall security management system. So who is responsible for what and so on. And on the basis you see the detection and response system. So which means who is regularly trying to find out if there is any kind of threat, who follows up what is discussed externally, and if there is a threat, how do you respond to this situation? Beside that, you have process modules which are about organization and personnel. You simply have to decide who is doing what, who is responsible for what. You have to staff these people and so on. And then you have concepts and methodologies, how to handle the systems, and you have to define the basic and daily operations. Besides that, you have system modules. These are, for example, about the applications like your SAP system, your IT systems in principle. If you run industrial IT, for example, you have a production plant which is steered by a computer, you have special modules here. Then there is one about networks, and finally one about infrastructure, for example, your rooms, your building, your power supply, and so on. There's quite some modules. And if you would like to have a comprehensive protection, you should start with a thorough analysis. For example, which are your values, your assets which should be protected the most? And what are the attacks which are most likely? However, for small companies, there might not be the right competence available to run this kind of analysis. Thus, there is a priority of modules which should be implemented first. On the following page, only those modules which have to be implemented in the first steps are listed. And the page after, one single module is shown to explain in more detail how these modules look like. And as an exercise, you could go to the link above and read through the prioritized modules which are shown on the coming page. So these one are the highest prioritized modules. The first is about security management. It's about simply setting up a complete system with meta rules and so on. The second one is about the organization. So who is responsible for implementing all this stuff? Then you require personnel. There is something about information security awareness and training, simply to fight these human factors issue we talked about before. And you remember this user concept? This is within identity and access management. So here it is defined which type of roles you have in your company and which role requires access to what kind of resources. The module Con 3 is about a backup concept, and Con 6 is about deleting and destroying data and devices which are no longer in use. You see there is some on operations. So one is about proper IT administration, some about patch and change management, simply to have the latest versions, which are usually the most secure ones. Then you have protection means against malware, for example, a virus scanner. You have logging, simply to document what has happened. And finally, you have software tests and approvals. So if there is a new version available, then it should be tested and checked if it works fine, if there is no new data security issue in there. And finally, you have, when it comes to detection and response, you have a module which defines detecting security relevant events. So if there is a threat outside, if there is an attack, it should be identified. And in case there is an incident, what should be done then? So what are the security incident handling? Let's take a look how these modules are organized. Let's take, for example, operation number 4, identity and access management. The principal structure of the module is always the same. First, there is an objective. Then there is a threat landscape, which means it is discussed what kind of problems might pop up if this threat is becoming a problem. And then there is some requirements identified which needs to be implemented. Here you have 11 basic requirements, 10 standard requirements, and 3 requirements with respect to increased protection needs if these are specified. And again, I have chosen one of those. ORP 4.A22 is about regulating password quality. It has to be set up by the IT operation department, and it's a basic requirement which is indicated by the B. And the idea is secure passwords of suitable quality must be chosen in line with their intended use and protection requirements. Passwords must be sufficiently complex so that they are difficult to guess. passwords must not be so complex that users cannot utilize them regularly with a reasonable amount of effort. Finally, there is some additional information about this module.